Marcus fidgeted nervously in his seat, his leg bouncing up and down in an endless staccato rhythm. He sat in the front row of the massive auditorium, surrounded by a sea of alien diplomats from every corner of the known galaxy. They were all here to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the historic Krygan-Prothean peace accords, the treaty that had ended centuries of brutal warfare and ushered in a new era of cooperation and prosperity for the two formerly belligerent species. And Marcus, as the first human ever invited to address this august body on such a momentous occasion, felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him like a physical force. His palms were slick with sweat, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had never spoken in front of such an important audience before. Hell, just last week he had been a mere university student, frantically cramming for his exams. Now, here he was, about to deliver a speech that could reshape the political landscape of the entire galaxy. Marcus glanced down at his notes for the 100th time, the words blurring together on the sweat-dampened page. He had stayed up all night working on this speech, agonizing over every word choice, every rhetorical flourish. He wanted it to be perfect. He needed it to be perfect. This was his chance to make history, to force the galaxy to acknowledge humanity's rightful place in the grand narrative of the cosmos. He could not afford to screw it up. Applause suddenly rippled through the auditorium, jolting Marcus out of his spiraling thoughts. He looked up to see that the previous speaker, the esteemed Prothean ambassador, was stepping down from the podium to a standing ovation from his people. Marcus swallowed hard. It was almost his turn. And now, esteemed delegates, the CAN moderator announced in a buzzing voice that echoed through the cavernous space. It is my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, representing the planet Earth and the human species. Please welcome Marcus Jameson, top student of galactic history at the prestigious University of Terra Prime. Polite applause pattered out through the audience as Marcus forced himself to his feet, his knees trembling. He tugged at the collar of his suit, feeling like it was strangling him. Every eye in the room was suddenly laser-focused on him, 1,000 alien gazes boring into him with curiosity, expectation, and even a hint of skepticism. He could practically hear their thoughts. Who was this young human upstart who dared to speak on such a hallowed occasion? What could he possibly have to say that would be worth their time? Marcus stepped up to the podium, the stage lights blinding him. His mouth felt as dry as the deserts of Mars. For a terrifying second, he was certain his voice would fail him, that he would stand there gaping in silence until they dragged him away. But then, he looked out over the crowd, saw the human delegation smiling at him in encouragement, and felt a sudden surge of determination. He would not let his people down. Not here. Not now. Not ever. Marcus activated the microphone with a trembling hand, took a deep breath, and began to speak. Thank you, moderator, and thank you to the CAN-Prothean Alliance for inviting me here today to speak on this momentous occasion. It is truly the greatest honor of my life to stand before you, the esteemed leaders of the galactic community. Marcus paused, letting his words hang in the air. The auditorium was utterly silent, every alien straining to hear this lone human voice. Good. He had their attention. Now it was time to use it. 50 years ago, after centuries of bitter conflict and bloodshed, the great Krygan and Prothean civilizations chose to lay down their weapons and embrace peace. They chose to end the cycle of vengeance and retribution that had consumed them for generations. They chose to build a new future together, based on cooperation, understanding, and mutual respect. It was a watershed moment for the galaxy, a triumph of hope over hatred, of unity over division. It proved that even the most implacable of foes could find common ground, if they had the wisdom and courage to seek it. Marcus saw some of the Krygan and Prothean delegates nodding along, expressions of pride and satisfaction on their alien features. They were clearly basking in this tribute to their historic achievement. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. The fools had no idea what was coming. In the decades since the accords were signed, the alliance has gone from strength to strength, he continued. It has become a beacon of peace and prosperity for the entire galaxy. a model for other species to follow. Its accomplishments have been nothing short of extraordinary. An end to war, an explosion of trade and economic growth, a renaissance of art and culture, quantum leaps in scientific and technological progress. The Alliance has pushed the boundaries of what sentient life can achieve when it works together for the common good. Its success is a testament to the visionary leadership of the Krygans and Protheans, and to the unbreakable bond of friendship they have forged. The applause was more enthusiastic this time, Krygans and Protheans thumping their appendages in appreciation of the praise. Marcus let it go on for a moment, then held up a hand for silence. It was time to drop the bomb. And yet, for all the Alliance's remarkable achievements, for all the well-deserved accolades it has received, there is one glaring omission in the story of its founding. One species whose critical contributions have been consistently overlooked or minimized. One people who have never received the recognition they deserve for their essential role in bringing about this historic peace. A confused murmur rippled through the auditorium, alien brows furrowing in puzzlement. Marcus could practically see the question on all their minds. Who could he possibly be talking about? He let the anticipation build for a beat, then delivered the answer like a thunderbolt. I am speaking, of course, about humanity, about the pivotal part that we humans played in ending the Krygan-Prothean War and forging the Alliance, about the fact that, without human involvement, none of this. He swept his hand out to encompass the auditorium, the Alliance banners hanging from the rafters, the entire glorious panorama of interstellar peace, would have been possible. The audience erupted in astonished gasps and frantic whispers, 1,000 alien voices rising in a cacophony of shock and disbelief. Marcus saw Krygans and Protheans turning to each other with incredulous expressions, shaking their heads in denial. A few looked outright hostile, mandibles clacking and spines bristling with indignation. But Marcus pressed on, his voice rising above the tumult. I know this must come as a surprise to many of you. After all, the official histories of the Alliance tend to downplay humanity's contributions, if they mention us at all. But the truth is, we were instrumental in bringing the Krygans and Protheans together and brokering the peace between them. We were the ones who made this impossible treaty possible. Marcus gripped the sides of the podium, his knuckles white. He had never felt so electrified, so exhilarated in his life. This was what he had been born to do, to speak truth to power on behalf of his species. Rewind half a century, and you would find the Krygans and Protheans still locked in their vicious, self-destructive war, with no end in sight. Both sides were too proud, too entrenched in their ancient hatreds, to even conceive of peace as an option. They had fought for so long that they had forgotten what they were even fighting for. The very idea of sitting down and talking with the enemy was anathema to them. Marcus paused, letting his words sink in. He could see the reluctant recognition dawning in some of the alien eyes, the slow nods of acceptance. They knew he was right, even if they didn't want to admit it. That was the state of play when humanity first made contact with the Krygans and Protheans. We were newcomers to the galactic stage with no stake in their conflict. We could have easily stayed out of it, focused on our own affairs, and left them to their endless bloodletting. Many of our leaders argued for just such a hands-off approach. He shook his head in wonderment. But in the end, we could not stand idly by while two sentient species tore each other apart. Our conscience, our very humanity, demanded that we at least try to help them find a better way. And so, with no experience and little hope of success, we took it upon ourselves to act as mediators between the warring factions. Marcus felt a swell of pride in his chest as he recounted the epic tale of human diplomacy. It was a long and grueling process, fraught with setbacks and frustrations. Our emissaries shuttled back and forth between the Krygan and Prothean capitals, patiently chipping away at the walls of mistrust and hatred that divided them. They spent months, years, listening to the grievances of both sides, acknowledging the wounds of the past, while trying to sketch out a vision of a shared future. It was delicate, painstaking work, and many times, it seemed doomed to failure. He leaned forward, his eyes blazing with intensity. But through sheer persistence, through stubborn refusal to give up even when all seemed lost, the human mediators slowly, incrementally brought the Krygans and Protheans to the negotiating table. They coaxed them to start talking instead of shooting. They helped them find common ground and identify mutual interests. Inch by hard-fought inch, they shepherded the two sides toward the momentous compromise that would become the peace accords. Marcus slammed his fist on the podium, his voice ringing out like a clarion call. Make no mistake, this treaty would not exist without human diplomatic efforts. Every provision, every clause bears the fingerprints of our negotiators. The very shape and structure of the alliance itself owes more to human ingenuity than Krygan or Prothean inspiration. He let that hang in the air for a moment, daring anyone to challenge him. The auditorium was deathly silent now, every alien hanging on his words. Marcus felt a thrill of vindication. This was the power of truth, the power of setting the record straight, and he was just getting started. Humanity's role did not end with the signing of the Accords. In the critical early years of the Alliance, when this newborn peace was still fragile and uncertain, it was human guidance that helped the Krygans and Protheans take their first tentative steps into cooperation. Human advisors helped them set up the joint institutions that would bind them together. Human legal experts helped them craft the laws and norms of their new society. Human security forces acted as neutral peacekeepers, diffusing tensions and preventing flare-ups of the old hostilities. Marcus's voice softened, taking on a tone of quiet pride. At every turn, humanity was there to nurture the alliance, to help the Krygans and Protheans turn their good intentions into a living, breathing reality. We gave them the tools and the expertise they needed to make this audacious experiment work. We held their hands and showed them the way forward, until they were ready to walk the path of peace on their own. He lifted his chin in defiance, eyes flashing. So, know this, the Alliance is not some exclusive Krygan and Prothean club, as they sometimes like to portray it. It is a trilateral partnership, with humanity as an equal and indispensable member. From conception to execution to consolidation, human efforts have been woven into the very fabric of the Alliance. Krygans and Protheans could never have achieved this on their own. Only with humanity as the bridge between them, the keystone in the arch, could the structure of peace be built. Marcus was nearly shouting now, his words tumbling out in a righteous torrent. All the pent-up frustration of years of studying this history, years of seeing humanity's contributions downplayed or denied, came pouring out of him. And yet, what recognition have we received for our vital role? How often do you hear human names mentioned alongside the Krygan and Prothean heroes of the Alliance? How many of you knew before today the extent of humanity's involvement in forging this peace? The truth is, our efforts have been systematically erased from the record, minimized and distorted when not outright ignored. The Krygans and Protheans have hoarded all the credit for themselves, rewritten history to cast themselves as the sole architects of this triumph. He slammed his hand down again, the sound echoing like a thunderclap. Well, I'm here to correct that record, to remind the galaxy of the debt it owes to humanity. You may not like hearing these truths from a mere student. You may be shocked to have your tidy narratives overturned, but you cannot deny the facts of what I'm telling you. The facts are clear and unassailable. Humanity was the difference maker. Humanity was the keystone. None of this, he flung his arms wide. None of this would exist without us. Marcus stepped back from the podium, breathing hard. His heart was pounding, his blood singing in his veins. He had said his piece, spoken the truth that had burned inside him for so long. Now it was up to the galaxy to deal with the consequences. For a long moment, the auditorium was silent as a tomb. The assembled aliens stared at Marcus in stunned disbelief, struggling to process the bombshell he had just dropped on them. Some looked angry, some looked thoughtful, some simply looked lost. But they had all heard him. They had all been forced to confront the reality of humanity's centrality to galactic history. Then, slowly, a single clap rang out from the human section of the auditorium. Then another and another. The human delegates rose to their feet, applauding and cheering, their faces alight with pride and validation. They had known the truth all along, and now, finally, the rest of the galaxy would have to acknowledge it too. To Marcus's amazement, some of the alien delegates began to join in the ovation, a few at first, then more and more Krygans and Protheans and a dozen other species rising from their seats and bringing their appendages together in applause. The Krygan and Prothean ambassadors in the front row looked at each other uncertainly for a moment, then stood and added their own polite clapping to the rising tide of acclaim. Soon, the entire auditorium was on its feet, applauding for a solid 5 minutes, the longest and loudest ovation of the ceremony by far. Marcus stood at the podium, basking in the adulation, a huge grin splitting his face from ear to ear. He had done it. He had put humanity back in its rightful place at the center of the story. His people would never be forgotten or overlooked again. As the applause finally died down, and the delegates began to retake their seats, Marcus saw the Krygan moderator approaching the podium, with an unreadable expression on his face. Marcus tensed, wondering if he was about to be reprimanded for his breach of protocol. But DTH merely extended a long-fingered hand to shake. "Thank you, Mr. Jameson, for that most illuminating speech," the moderator said carefully. "You have certainly given us much to reflect on." "That was my intent, moderator," Marcus replied, meeting the alien's gaze without flinching. "I hope the Alliance will take this opportunity to re-examine its history and give humanity the recognition we deserve." "Yes, well," Didich said, his mandibles twitching in what might have been a smile, or a grimace. "You've certainly accomplished your goal of making an impact today. The ambassadors will be talking about your speech for a long time to come, I imagine." "Good," Marcus said firmly. "Maybe now, the truth about humanity's contributions will finally be acknowledged." He turned and strode off the stage, his head held high. The human delegates mobbed him as he reached his seat, shaking his hand and pounding his back in congratulation. Marcus accepted their accolades with a grin, but his mind was already racing ahead to the next step. This speech was just the beginning. Now that he had cracked open the door, he would kick it wide and let the light of truth come flooding in. He would make it his life's mission to ensure that humanity received its proper due, that his people were recognized as the giants they were. No more would they be content with scraps from the Krygan and Prothean table. Humanity would claim its place at the head of that table, and the galaxy would thank them for it. Professor Xylon is going to have a conniption when he hears about this, Marcus thought with a smirk. The hidebound old Krygan academic had wanted Marcus to deliver a bland, uncritical recap of Alliance history, sticking to the official narrative. He had warned Marcus not to rock the boat, not to challenge the accepted wisdom. Well, Marcus had done more than rock the boat. He had capsized it and set it on fire for good measure, and he didn't regret it for a second. Let Professor Xylon and all the other alien elites splutter and fume. They could not put the genie of truth back in the bottle. The galaxy would have to deal with the new reality that Marcus had unveiled. Humanity, yeah, Marcus thought to himself as he basked in the afterglow of his defiant speech. We're the giants in this story, and it's time everyone else learned to look up. As the rest of the ceremony proceeded, Marcus found it hard to concentrate on the remaining speeches. His mind was still reeling from the momentousness of what he had just done. In the space of a few minutes, he had overturned decades of received wisdom about the founding of the Alliance. He had shattered the complacent narrative that the Krygans and Protheans had constructed to aggrandize themselves. And in so doing, he had struck a mighty blow for his own species. Humanity would no longer be content to remain in the shadows, humbly accepting whatever scraps of recognition the other races deigned to toss them. From now on, they would insist on their rightful place in the limelight, at the center of the galactic stage. Marcus knew there would be repercussions for his iconoclastic speech. The Krygan and Prothean ambassadors had put on a good show of politely applauding, but he had seen the anger and resentment simmering in their eyes. They would not take kindly to this young upstart who had dared to challenge their cherished myths. Even now, they were probably huddling together, plotting ways to undermine and discredit him. But Marcus was not afraid. He had the truth on his side, and the courage of his convictions. Let them come at him with all their might. He would stand firm. This was his destiny, the role he had been born to play. He would be the champion of humanity, the voice crying out in the wilderness, demanding justice for his people. As the ceremony finally ended, and the delegates began to file out of the auditorium, Marcus felt a hand clap him on the shoulder. He turned to see Consul Jung, the head of the human delegation, grinning at him broadly. "That was one hell of a speech, son," the consul said, shaking his head in amazement. "I've never seen the Krygans and Protheans so flummoxed. You sure know how to stir the pot." Marcus stood a little straighter, basking in the praise. "Thank you, sir. I only said what needed to be said, what we've all been thinking for far too long." "Indeed," Jung nodded. "And it's high time someone had the guts to say it out loud. You did humanity proud today, Marcus. I'll make sure the folks back home hear all about it." He leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "Of course, you've also painted a big, fat target on your back. The Krygans and Protheans won't take this lying down. They'll be gunning for you now." Marcus met his gaze steadily. "Let them try, sir. I'm not afraid of a fight, especially not when it's a fight for the truth." Jung chuckled and clapped him on the shoulder again. "Spoken like a true Terran. Keep that fire burning, son. We're going to need it in the days ahead." With that, the consul melted away into the crowd, leaving Marcus standing alone in the emptying auditorium. He took a deep breath, savoring the moment. This was just the beginning. He knew there were battles yet to come, a long, hard road ahead in the struggle for human recognition. But as he strode out of the auditorium into the bright sunlight of the alien world, Marcus felt no fear, only a sense of exhilaration and purpose. He had found his calling, his true mission in life. He would be the one to lead humanity out of the shadows and into the light. No matter the cost, no matter the opposition, he would not rest until his species assumed its rightful place at the pinnacle of the galaxy. Humanity first, he thought fiercely as he went forth to meet his destiny. Humanity forever. Let the whole universe tremble before our might.